In the early summer of 1944, the officers of the German High Command viewed the unfolding Allied invasion of Normandy through a lens of absolute logistical skepticism. To the Prussian-trained generals of the regular German army, warfare was a science dictated strictly by iron rails and heavy locomotives. The German military machine was completely dependent on the massive, centralized state railway system. For decades, German doctrine dictated that an army could only advance as fast as its engineers could lay down tracks. Behind the lines, they relied on millions of horses to haul supplies from the railheads to the front line. When German staff officers looked at the incoming intelligence reports regarding the United States military, they openly laughed. The Americans did not rely on a classic rail and horse doctrine. Instead, they had built a highly unorthodox, fully mechanized army dependent entirely on internal combustion engines, rubber tires, and open roadways. To the German High Command, this looked like the wasteful, amateurish design of an industrial consumer society, not a professional fighting force. They calculated that a truck-dependent army would require an astronomical, unsustainable amount of gasoline, tires, and maintenance. German logistics experts confidently predicted that the moment the Allies attempted to push deep into the European continent, their road-bound supply network would collapse under its own weight. They assumed that a lack of locomotives would paralyze the American advance, trapping them in Normandy. But the German generals were operating on an obsolete playbook. They were about to learn that the United States military did not view logistics as a mere supporting arm of the infantry. They viewed logistics as a high-velocity, industrialized weapon of mass destruction. In late August of 1944, the German predictions almost came true. Following the spectacular breakout of Operation Cobra, General George S. Patton's Third Army turned eastward and unleashed a blistering, high-speed armored blitz across the French landscape. Patton's armored divisions were moving so fast that they were completely bypassing German defensive positions, covering up to 40 miles in a single day. But this unprecedented operational speed triggered a catastrophic supply chain crisis. Patton's Third Army was a ravenous, industrial beast. A single armored division consumed roughly 25,000 gallons of fuel every 24 hours. Collectively, Patton's force was burning through over 400,000 gallons of gasoline a day. Furthermore, the Allied air forces had done their job too well. Prior to D-Day, Allied bombers had systematically vaporized the French railway network to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Virtually every bridge, rail yard, and locomotive in northern France was a smoking pile of twisted steel. The Allies had plenty of fuel sitting on the Liberty ships anchored at the Normandy beaches, but their forward combat units were now over 200 miles away. The supply lines were stretched to the absolute breaking point. Patton's tanks were literally running out of gas while actively pursuing a retreating enemy. The entire European offensive was on the verge of freezing in place. The German generals began to celebrate, believing their mathematical calculations had been proven correct. The American truck army was finally running dry. It was at this exact moment of crisis that the U.S. Army Transportation Corps executed an emergency logistical maneuver that shifted the entire balance of power on the continent. They called it the Red Ball Express. The Red Ball Express was not a casual convoy system. It was a highly engineered, closed-loop industrial conveyor belt. Launched on August 25, 1944, under an absolute emergency mandate, its objective was singular: bypass the ruined railways and move thousands of tons of supplies from the Normandy beachheads straight to the front lines without a single minute of interruption. To achieve this, American logistical planners completely restructured the geography of northern France. They designated two parallel routes stretching from Saint-Lô to the forward supply hubs near Paris. The northern route was designated strictly for inbound, loaded convoys. The southern route was reserved entirely for outbound, empty trucks returning for reload. These two highways became an exclusive, high-velocity military zone. All civilian traffic, regular infantry movements, and non-essential vehicles were banned under penalty of immediate military arrest. The rules of the loop were absolute and unyielding. Convoys were required to maintain a strict, continuous speed of 25 miles per hour. Vehicles were ordered to maintain a precise distance of 60 feet between each truck, and the entire system operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At its absolute peak, the Red Ball Express weaponized a fleet of over 6,000 vehicles, primarily the legendary GMC 2.5-ton 6x6 transport trucks. Over 75% of the drivers who manned this relentless operation were African American soldiers, operating within a segregated military system, who bore the brutal, exhausting weight of keeping the entire Allied army alive. The drivers operated under conditions of extreme physical torture. They drove for 20 to 36 hours consecutively without sleep, staring through the darkness at the tiny, dim blackout lights of the truck ahead of them. They drove through toxic clouds of swirling road dust, engine exhaust, and blinding rainstorms. If a truck broke down, the driver did not stop to fix it. They simply pushed the vehicle into the ditch so the endless chain of cargo could keep moving. The sheer industrial throughput of the Red Ball Express completely paralyzed the strategic calculations of the German defensive commanders. Every single day, the truck loop was delivering up to 12,000 tons of high-priority ammunition, medical supplies, and rations directly to the front lines. But above all else, the Red Ball Express was delivering oil. Millions of gallons of combat fuel, packed into standardized 5-gallon jerry cans, were passed hand-to-hand from the back of transport trucks directly into the fuel tanks of Patton's Sherman units. Because the Red Ball Express kept the logistical pipeline full, Patton was able to sustain an operational tempo that the German army considered mathematically impossible. The Wehrmacht kept attempting to establish new defensive lines behind rivers or inside forests, assuming the Americans would have to stop and wait for their supplies to catch up. Instead, every time a German division tried to dig in, Patton's armored columns, replenished by the endless stream of red-balled trucks, would slam into their positions before the concrete could even dry. The velocity of the supply line enabled a velocity of destruction. The continuous influx of fuel allowed the Third Army to encircle entire German field armies, crushing their defensive cohesion before it could ever form. By the time the Red Ball Express officially concluded in November of 1944, following the successful opening of the deep-water port at Antwerp, the operation had moved a staggering 12,000 tons of supplies across the European continent. The German generals who had laughed at America's truck-dependent military design in the spring were either dead, captured, or in full retreat by the winter. They had committed a fatal error of intellectual arrogance. They had mistook a highly advanced, flexible system of motorized logistics for a lack of military discipline. The historical legacy of the Red Ball Express redefines the true nature of victory in the Second World War. The conflict was not merely won by the tactical brilliance of commanders on the front line or the technical armor thickness of individual tanks. It was won by an unyielding, industrialized supply chain that could manufacture velocity out of thin air. General George S. Patton's brilliant lightning-fast blitz across Europe was undoubtedly a masterpiece of aggressive operational command. But that blitz only existed because thousands of transport trucks were driving through the French night at 25 miles per hour, proving that in modern total war, the ultimate arbiter of victory is not the sword, but the machine that feeds it.